This video was made possible by Morning Brew. This is the Kuril Islands. There's 58 of them, and they're nestled between the vast Pacific Ocean and the Sea of Okhotsk. Now, 54 of the islands belong to Russia. No one is contesting that. But Russia is also claiming these 4 major islands in the south, and that's a problem because Japan also claims them. Now, the islands are mostly cold and barren, which might make you believe it's silly to fight for them. But they actually play an important role in modern geopolitics between Japan and Russia. While Moscow considers them as part of the Sakhalin Oblast, which is up here, Japan strongly states that they belong to the Hokkaido prefecture, down here, and neither nation is willing to change their stance. The 2 biggest islands, Iturup and Kunashir, are considered by Russia to be direct extensions of the motherland, and therefore non-negotiable. And the 2 small islands, Shikoden and the Habomai group, have traditionally been seen as Japanese. Yet, past talks, conferences and meetings to settle this matter have been rather uneventful, as it led to these 2 nations never signing a formal peace treaty. So why are they fighting for these islands, and why are they valuable? Well, the strategic location, mineral wealth, and the nationalism that these islands bring are all things both countries want to maintain. On top of this, Kuril gives direct access to the Pacific Ocean for Russia, while offering vast fishing grounds for both nations, and last but not least, a sizable extension of their respective exclusive economic zones. So there's definitely an incentive here, which might explain the rather unconventional negotiating tactics they've used over the years. See, the most recent meetup about the Kuril issue between Russian President Vladimir Putin and former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe showed promise but fell apart once Japan refused the decades-old offer of 7% of the islands. Now, I completely understand that the Russian citizens in Sakhalin considered any succession of Russian territory to be treason, but come on, 7%? I think Japan would have accepted it had they offered 6.9% instead, but that's just me. Anyway, the situation became even more confusing once an amendment to the Russian constitution came that bans any alienation of Russian territory, which I think is a pretty redundant amendment. I mean, obviously no country wants to alienate its own territory, and sometimes you just don't have a choice, which means having a law against it won't really help you in that situation, making it useless. But anyway. With tensions rising during the 2020 Tokyo Olympics and again in 2021, this small string of islands with a mere population of 30,000 is causing a lot of diplomatic distress and could lead to a crack in the Russian Federation and weakened nationalism in Japan. Like many modern-day political conflicts, this one also has its roots in World War II. See, the sovereignty of the islands has always switched between Russia and Japan through the 18th and 19th century via treaties. But in 1945, everything changed. Just 5 days before Japan formally surrendered, the Soviet Union declared war against them at the request of the US government. The deal between the US and the USSR was that the Soviet Union would get the Kuril Islands and the southern half of Sakhalin Island, which had fallen under Japanese rule after the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. So the Soviets invaded in August, and after nearly a century, the entire Kuril archipelago, including the 4 disputed islands, fell under Soviet rule. Since then, both Japan and the Soviet Union, which eventually became Russia, have had many failed attempts at signing a treaty to divide the land and formally end this war. So it's a bit of a mess, but politically, Japan argues that the 1956 declaration that designated all of the Kuril Islands to the Soviet Union did not specify by name which islands belonged to the archipelago, nor did it state that the islands were permanently the territory of the Soviet Union, which means Japan doesn't recognize the 4 islands as part of the Kuril archipelago. But they also cite the 1945 eviction of Japanese residents on Iturup and Kunashir as evidence of their original ownership. Essentially, Japan states that these islands had little to no Russian influence before 1945, and therefore it should be considered Japanese. The funny thing is though, that both countries claim exploration of the land before the other, and both claim the Ainu indigenous people of the islands as their own, which is pretty messed up. So whose is it? Well, before we continue, here's a news update brought to you by Morning Brew, the sponsor of this video. Typically, January is a slow month for residential real estate, at least historically, but that's no longer the case. as this January is shaping up to be the most competitive month in housing history. This is backed by the fact that median home sale prices soared 16% annually in the week ending January 9th, notching a new record of $365,000. In the past month, 41% of homes sold for above their listing price, up from 33% a year earlier. If you're interested in science, technology, business, or finance, Morning Brew is the newsletter that you need in your life. Morning Brew takes all of the news and compiles them into your inbox daily. It's easy to digest and gets you up to speed in just 5 minutes. So click the link below to sign up. It's free and you can literally sign up in just 15 seconds. There's simply no reason not to. Okay, back to the video. Who do these islands belong to? Well, perhaps the strongest political argument lies with the example of Germany. See, Japan states that the fall of the Soviet Union and the reunification of East and West Germany by Russia shows that they are willing to cede land to former owners, and these islands should be no different. So that's the political argument, but when it comes to similarities in ecology and climate, Japan, objectively speaking, wins out, as the islands form part of the Ring of Fire, and conditions closely mimic the climate and weather patterns of mainland Japan. Earthquakes in the area cause tsunamis that reach as far as California. Add to this the windy winters and mild summers with no permafrost, and you see a geological similarity to Japan. But of course, that alone can't be a determining factor in a matter such as this, and of course Russia doesn't agree with this, and it states that they rightfully occupy the Kurils. And the reasoning seems legit, as they cite the Yalta Agreement that promised them the archipelago after Japan's defeat in 1945 as a pretty solid argument. But Japan states that the 1945 agreement is irrelevant, because the Soviet Union broke their neutrality agreement with Japan. Russia disagrees, and argues that Japan broke the neutrality by engaging in aggressive German Nazi actions against the Soviet Union in 1940, and also points out that if this ownership is to be questioned, then all other post-World War II territories should come under scrutiny too, which by the way would be a disaster for all countries that gain land as a result of the war. So clearly negotiating doesn't work for these two, and we're back to square one again. Well, in terms of geology, history, and politics at least. But what about money? Well, in terms of investment, it turns out Russia has poured a lot into having a strong presence in the region, especially when it comes to the military. The common idea is that if Japan gets a grip of larger islands like Kunashir, they will freely allow the United States to build a military base there, much like on Okinawa, which would be a defense strategy, seeing as the country is already surrounded by US allies to the west, and the largest foreign US military base is located in South Korea. So from a strategic point of view, the investment makes sense, and it's become quite a strong presence in the Pacific Ocean, as the strait between Iturup and Kunashir doesn't freeze during the winter, giving them year-round access to pre-stationed warships. But obviously, Russia's military actions have not been welcomed by Japan. When Russia started military drills in the area, the Japanese were forced to scramble their fighter jets in retaliation, which didn't really help. Most recently, in October of 2020, Russia showed their control of the islands by deploying S-300V4 air defense missile systems to the territory for what they describe as exercises and tests, which was also met by criticism from the Japanese government, who felt Russia was militarizing the zone. So yeah, the fighting has been going on for a long time, and with good reason, as these islands have a lot of things both nations want. As an example, Iturup alone has one of the world's rarest metals, rhenium, found on the Kudryavy volcano. This metal is used for the essential construction of supersonic aircrafts and other military weaponry. But the islands are also rumored to have large reserves of oil and gas offshore, though this is just speculation at this point and has yet to be confirmed officially. A rather obvious resource though is fish, which is obviously an industry that brings in significant revenue for Japan, and this region's marine life is rich and still untapped. So with this many valuable resources up for grabs, we shouldn't really expect these nations to play nicely. But I think we're forgetting the people who are trapped in the middle of this battle, the inhabitants. I mean, just look at this. The conditions of some of these settlements shows that development is lagging behind, and improvement on the lives of the inhabitants is mostly non-existent. Take for example the town of Kurilsk on Iturup, the largest of the 4 contested islands. It's full of randomly built structures next to mounds of snow and dry grass. Much of the land is not utilized, and empty spaces like this are common. And since it's not connected to either country, one must use the ferry or fly if they want to go to or from the island. Add to this the fact that the ferry, the main way to get to the island, only operates every 1 to 2 weeks in the colder months of the year. And even if you do catch the ferry, it takes 20 hours to get from Port Korsakov on Sakhalin Island to Kursk, which is certainly not ideal. So the inhabitants are forced to find work on the island, which is easier said than done. Essentially, fishing is pretty much the only option, and therefore by far the biggest moneymaker. Yet still, the 11,000 inhabitants who are of working age largely live below the poverty line. So what do the inhabitants think of all this, and who do they think is the rightful owner? Well, despite all the struggles, the idea of the islands being handed over to Japan is not popular at all. A 2019 poll revealed that nearly 96% of those living in Kuril are against islands going to Japan, with most considering themselves Russian due to familiarity and ethnicity. So new leadership seems like an unnecessary headache to them. All in all, I have no clue or opinion on who these islands should belong to or will belong to, but what do you think? Leave a comment below. But that's it for this video, thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.